This is System Crash. I'm Paris Marks.
And I'm Brian Merchant. This week on the show, a new poll shows that nearly half of all teens wish the internet simply did not exist. And what can we say? The children are the future. Meanwhile, the reason why the kids hate the internet are dead set on making it all worse. Google and Microsoft announced their plans to continue stuffing AI into every available surface. The future they see is 100% AI generated. Plus, SpaceX flexes its muscle in Texas. An AI-generated book list makes it into print. Netflix gets the rights to Sesame Street. And oh, so much more.
This system has just begun to crash, so support the show by heading over to patreon.com/systemcrashpod, where you can sign up to get monthly bonus episodes. Also, rate the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Brian, how you doing this week?
Oh, fantastic.
Are you the Kool-Aid man or something? Did you just burst through a wall?
That's, I've never gotten that before, but I feel like that is my vibe. I feel like that every time that, I'm like, I'm Brian maybe I've just been channeling the Kool-Aid man this entire time.
We need to get you a t-shirt. I'm the Kool-Aid man. Yeah.
You know what? The Kool-Aid man makes no apologies. He bursts into rooms that he wants to be in. I would even go so far as to say that the Kool-Aid man has a little bit of, Luddite in him. He smashes down those walls. Yes, he's a corporate product, brand ambassador, but, he still has that destructive vibe I can get behind.
Hey, man, when it comes to American culture, that's almost all you got, right, is corporate products. So
doesn't Canada kind of view all of the U.S. as like the Kool-Aid man, constantly like
breaking through the wall of our border?
Yeah. Their border is very strict. I'm sure things have just completely changed, and now it's just the other way around and horrible. But, as a kid, I remember 19, 20-year-old trying to get across the Canadian border, and they were quite strict. Quite austere up there.
Yeah, we definitely feel the total opposite in terms of going into the US. You're scared of what the TSA agents are going to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, now it's got to be it's horrible. And I'm sure it's always been bad, but as a blinkered American, just assuming that he's entitled to, go wherever he wants.
Would that have been before you needed a passport to cross the border?
The first time I went to Canada, you did not need a passport. I think I was 18 or 19 years old. And so this was back in the aughts, the early aughts, and you could just cruise right across. Same with Mexico. You didn't need a passport. You could just go across. Simpler times, Paris.
The pre-9/11 days.
Yeah, before the Patriot Act and the unraveling of the economy as we know it, the entire universe. When kids were free to roam, unlike kids today who are just looking at their phones and getting sad. See what I do? That segue there?
This is so great. You're so good at this, Brian. Yeah.
So good. I'm just a podcasting master now. Yeah, I've come so far.
Of course, Brian is talking about this new survey out of the UK from the British Standards Institute, which talked to young people aged 16 to 21. And, was basically asking them about social media and about the internet and how they feel about these things. And I feel like we've been seeing more and more of these stories over recent years about the effects of social media on young people and whether we need action on these things. And I feel like this survey is just so damning for the digital environment that has been created over the past few decades, because 70% of 16 to 21-year-olds surveyed for this say that they feel worse about themselves after they spend time on social media. Half of them support a digital curfew that would restrict their access to certain apps and sites past 10 o'clock at night, and 46% say that they would prefer to be young in a world without the internet altogether. So you think about all the things that we associate with the internet. There are a lot of great things that come of it, the access, the information, the communication, and they're like, you know what? To stop feeling so shitty, I would give all of that up if I could just not feel this bad. It's wild.
Yeah, well, just wind back the clock, erase the entire internet. It's how bad. I mean, that's because usually these studies or sort of these kind of think pieces about this, or the Jonathan Haidt book, the Anxious Generation. It all has that as we talk about a lot. It has this air of moral panic to it too. But this is the kids themselves just saying, I would rather this not exist at all. I think it's just so toxic. I would rather just log off. They support the digital curfews. It's self-reported. Like, this is what the actual sort of kids think. And I think you're absolutely right. Like, there was a generation in between, sort of like the millennials and Gen Z, the older echelons of Gen Z, where it was like there was still a lot of sort of exciting stuff online, or like your friends were on social media. So it was like a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. Like, you wanted to be on Facebook. Now it's TikTok, but
yeah. Well, it's like when I was growing up, when I was going into high school, was just when smartphones were really getting popularized. The iPhone was announced, like, I think a couple years before, like around the time that I started high school was when, the iPhone and then the Androids and stuff were coming out as well. Like, it was really uncommon to have a smartphone at the time that I was going into high school. You'd have those old feature phones with like T9 word and stuff, and you'd be texting away with, and, people were on MySpace and Facebook was like just coming along. But even the Facebook back then, like, it was so much less commercialized, right? And the feed was not structured in the way that it is today. Like, people were using it. Certainly there were some like controversies and dramas that came out of social media, but it wasn't as central to like our lives back then as it has become today, right?
Yeah, it hadn't been like relentlessly optimized to try to make it as addictive as possible, to maximize time on screen, all of those kind of things. They were still kind of figuring it out. Yeah, I'm a few years older, so the iPhone wasn't even announced when I was in high school. We also had like the early sort of, I had like a weird like Qualcomm cell phone that like, it was like, there's nothing exciting about it. In fact, if this will date me instantly, but it was like your parents would want you to have it. You just throw it in the back of your car if you were like going out for the evening as a teenager or something, so you could call if you were in trouble. You didn't want any part of it.
Yeah.
You wanted to be free from that shit. You wanted to be able to like go to the lake without like,
you didn't want the parents to be able to get in contact with you like that. Yeah.
Let's put it this way. Sometimes, you wanted to be eventually sort of, you did want to be able to call your friends and find out where they were at, or text your friends. And I think that's a great just like illustration of like these forces like in embryo, where you're like, I don't want this level of sort of surveillance that comes along with this phone. I'd rather just leave it behind, or at least I personally did. And then sort of, well, like, I got to find out where my friends are at, like which Starbucks they're at when everybody's off work or whatever from their dumb summer jobs. So you start to justify or want having it around all the time. And like that, now it's just like completely in the intervening 20 years or so, it's just been on steroids now. So you did not have like, and nobody did, or like, was there some kids that had phones in your school?
Oh, totally. Like, they were starting to come along, right? But most of us would have had the old like feature phones, like the flip phones, or the ones that would slide up and things.
The clamshell.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But like, there was like probably one or two people in school who had an iPhone, right? And it would have been like the original iPhone, and it was like, man, they have like the new iPhone, Like, I can't believe their parents got it. So when you went to college,
that it was way more integrated. So there were people were starting to like,
absolutely,
you would have friends who
yeah,
had an
by
iPhone.
the time I went to university, like, I think I probably had an iPhone, or maybe like the first year of university I got one or something like that. Like, I already had a cell phone, but it was just one of those more basic cell phones, right? Where you could still get like limited internet access, but it wasn't like a smartphone. But even then, like, I don't really remember social media or the internet being like central to my university experience. It hadn't still like made that step to be so all consuming, but certainly like as smartphones became available, like we wanted them, right? Because that was like new, cool, whatever. We wanted like the latest tech and whatnot, or at least I did. I was into that stuff.
What was your first iPhone? What is the first iPhone?
iPhone 3GS, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting. I think my first iPhone was a 4. I think mine was that. So I actually got an iPhone after you did, despite being a little older than you.
Well, I was like totally an enthusiast, right? When I was younger.
Right, yeah. Little known fact about Paris. I don't know if you talk about this sometimes, but I feel like it's not totally part of the Paris Marks narrative necessarily that everybody knows, but used to be a gadget head.
Absolutely. 100%. I was like a big time Sony fan back when I was younger. Like, I wanted a Sony MP3 player. I wanted a Sony TV. Obviously, I was a PlayStation player, all that kind of stuff. Sony digital camera. For me, it was like
Apple too, right? Didn't you used to read the Apple blogs? Yeah.
So it was Sony, but then as like the iPhone was coming along and all that kind of stuff, like I totally pivoted to being really into Apple stuff. And so I believe the iPhone, no, an iPod would have been my first Apple product. And then I got the iPhone. And then when I graduated university, I believe, I got a MacBook then for the first time. And like, yeah, I was totally into it. Like I was obsessed.
We're going into all kinds of tangents here too, but like the iPod was famously kind of credited with revitalizing Apple along with sort of a refreshed Mac line that Johnny Ive designed. But you know, Apple was in dire straits all through the 90s, and then but the real thing that really boosted it was the iPod. Yeah, this cool consumer tech that, you know, could fit in the palm of your hand.
It was
that
very
like,
cool. It had the iTunes
it was
connection.
cool. It had like the
right?
cultural symbiosis.
Exactly,
yeah,
right?
Like,
you know, when you were young, like you wanted an iPod, you wanted iTunes, because iTunes is like where you could easily get music and you could load your tracks onto it and whatnot. And, you know, it was, I don't know, for whatever reason, we felt it was better than like a regular MP3 player.
it was fun. You know, honestly, give like the designers credit where
Totally.
like the rotary wheel, like you like scan, like had this very satisfying, like the first models anyways, where it was like an old rotary phone where you would like kind of crank it around, but then you'd spin it and it would go like tick, 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 tick.
And the display was nice as well. Like, you know, you think about those older MP3 players and it was like the screen was not nearly like as intuitive and things would be cut off. Like you wouldn't see the whole track name and all that kind of stuff. And the iPod screen was like much cleaner and nicer. And
Yeah, and that the moment, you know, just sitting like on a road trip, looking out the window with like the, you know, with the earbuds in and the like. Importantly, there's no like advertising crammed in there. It was just your songs, just your musics, and you know, it eventually it sort of merged more with sort of the iPhone presentation and became a touchscreen, just like everything else. But yeah, I mean that
now like they don't even make iPods, right?
by the end of its run, the iPod was just basically an iPhone that didn't have a satellite signal.
Yep.
So it was just, it would connect only to Wi-Fi. And in fact, I know a cybersecurity reporter who I won't out, but who for a long time used an iPod instead of an iPhone as like part of the OPSEC, right? Like, so you don't actually have to have phone or connect a LTE or 4G at the time or whatever.
It is fascinating, though. I know we've gone on about this for a little while, but it's fascinating to me that like we've come this far, right? You know, we went from this era, like I certainly experienced it, from like the feature phones to the smartphones, everything needing to be like integrated into this phone. This was the future. This was the desirable thing. Like, why would we have a digital camera? Why would we have an e-reader? It can all just be in the phone. We can do all this stuff in the phone. It's this device that does everything. You need to have it on you. It becomes like essential to your being, basically, to living in a modern society. And recently I've been finding myself on the Our Dumbphones Reddit a lot. To me, it's fascinating because it feels like it's a bunch of young people, really, who are posting on there. Obviously, I haven't been checking everyone's ages, but it feels like it's a bunch of young people, like teenagers, early 20s, stuff like that, who want their flip phones, who want like an old feature phone, who are buying like a digital camera and an e-reader and whatever like separate devices to bring along with them instead of having this like integrated device that has everything. And it's just fascinating to me to see this like desire in these younger people for this like form of technology that we had so long before. This just like turn against the past 15 years. Personally, I think I would like someone to give me like money to do a research project to like talk to a bunch of these young people and see what they're feeling, because I think it would be fascinating.
No, it is. And I mean, I know that there, you know, the Luddite Club, which is like maybe the most famous example of a bunch of kids in New York City who rejected phones. They live in New York. They got written up by the New York Times. And there's a documentary being made of them, which I look forward to checking out. But like, it is definitely a headwind right now. And we need to consider what it means that I, for instance, am grateful. I feel such gratitude that I like really came up against the cusp of it. It was, I think we both did, where it was like kind of out there and it was an element. But even as like a young guy in my 20s, it wasn't all about the iPhone. I lived in New York City at the time, and I feel like thinking back and, you know, to how sort of just how present in that environment and how chaotic and how like real and visceral it all was. And I was like, I don't know if that would be as possible. And I don't know. I don't know how much of this is old guy yelling at clouds and how much of it is the fact that there was a greater distance between, the digital technologies and the digital tools. It was increasingly there, but they didn't weigh the same. They didn't have the same gravity. And again,
But this
comes
is it,
back,
right?
yeah.
And I think that connects back to this story that we started talking
Yes.
about, which is that
Yeah.
you feel that way. And I don't think it is old man yelling at clouds, because I think that we're increasingly seeing this desire from young people as well. And this is where I think this discussion is so important, maybe just to tie a bow on it, and then we can move on to the next topic. But it's not just about like an individual action, right? Like something that, while I think like our dumbphones is really cool and I love to see these young people like challenging it, getting off of it, I think the difficulty there, because sometimes you see a response to this, it's just like, oh, well, they could get off social media. Why aren't they doing that? But it just feels for a lot of people that it's kind of essential to live this sort of a life, to be on these sort of platforms, because so much does occur on them. Like I know a bunch of
Right.
people who'd be like, man, I hate using Facebook, but I feel like I still got to be on there because like events are often posted on there, or I need to use Marketplace or something like that, right?
Or LinkedIn for a job, or even like social media for work. And I do feel like this is a good moment, though, because with the collapse of Twitter and the fragmentation of the social media landscape, the broad recognition that like so much of this stuff can and has been toxic, is that I do feel like there is a window and an opening to sort of either sort of fight for laws and regulation and new cultural standards, and to like celebrate people who reject this stuff in varying degrees, and fight for new norms and new levels of acceptance, because the Silicon Valley companies would love nothing more than for us to be completely dependent and enmeshed in these services all of the time. They themselves like publish these studies from time to time that leak out that like, oh yeah, well, like this, it turns out that this is addictive, and then we're going to look at it and we'll make like the tiniest tweak possible, and then you'll just have to continue using these services. But it does feel like there's a rupture, or a potential for a rupture right now. And as I'm thinking about my own kids, like I got a 9-year-old, right?
He's right on the cusp.
He's on the cusp, and I'm like, some of his classmates I have phones, and I know, and it's just like, no way. And obviously I'm gonna have to navigate this in a more serious fashion pretty soon. But I'm grateful that it's this moment too, rather than 10 years ago, where it was like, I feel like we talk about a lot about how sort of, Apple dominated with the iPhone, and how like the gig app economy came to dominate. Now AI is winning its battle for ubiquity, but like social media also was a choice, and they chose to sort of emphasize how ubiquitous it needed to be, and they kind of won that battle in the minds of policymakers, businesses, users, where the default assumption was that you have to be on these platforms. You have to do it for your career, you have to do it for socialization, you have to do it for if you want a life, if you want to follow your bands. And like, I think now we know how toxic and how awful that sort of calculus was. But there's going to be a whole generation of kids, at least, even if we do walk it back now, even if we do sort of address some of these. Honestly, it's like the common, and maybe it was thought to be overwrought at the time, but like, is the phone like the cigarettes of its time? And we don't, it's completely untested what we're just broadcasting into people's brains. And that's if we can change anything. Maybe it's going to continue unabated.
Well, and this is where I think it's so important, right? Is that when we see surveys like this one that we're talking about, where 46% of young people are like, I would like to be young in a time without the internet. 70% say social media makes me feel bad about myself when I use it. That it's like, either governments act now to try to rein this in, or the like opposition against the internet as a whole, or like this digital system, continues to rise to a point that they probably certainly don't want to see, the companies certainly don't want to see. So it's like, either you bring in some rules now to try to address this, or the backlash is just going to get even more aggressive and want something much more comprehensive to be done, right? And it seems like that is going to ultimately be the choice here.
The one way to translate these findings is get it out of here. 46% would rather there just be no internet. I don't think, again, as you were saying and hinting at it when we started talking about this, it's not that it's a blanket rejection of like the entire idea of the internet. It's just how it is presenting as a result of the web and the internet and the apps that these kids know being completely colonized by a handful of companies that are seeking to exploit them at every turn. And that's what we've got. We've got this completely toxic environment ruled by Meta Elon Musk, Amazon, Apple. Like it's the nooks and crannies where you can actually have something that's not this relentlessly optimized for addiction experience. They're vanishingly few. So it's not that they want to destroy the internet. It's just they want to destroy the internet that they know that they've grown up with, which is the one built by big tech, by Silicon Valley.
Exactly. The hyper commercialized internet that we know and hate.
I was going to say, but fortunately, that internet is not about to get worse or anything. It's not like the two of the biggest tech companies that dominate and dictate our experience on software platforms have any interest in saturating their platforms further with more and more dubiously pleasant and dubiously useful AI tools, is it, Paris?
They would never, right? They would never want to make the situation even worse.
Do more and more to colonize our eyeballs against our will.
Unfortunately, Brian is obviously being sarcastic, because what we saw this week at Microsoft's Build conference and Google's I.O. was exactly that, as they plan to roll out this generative AI stuff in even more parts of our lives and even more of the digital services that we use. You know, it's this like continued expansion, this continued colonization of our lives, of the digital environment, of the infrastructure. AI has to be everywhere because that is what these companies believe is key to their business models. And like, it's just so, I want to say disappointing, but like disappointing isn't really the word. Like, it's just so disheartening to see the degree to which these technologies keep being pushed out at scale, despite the fact that there are so many issues with them, despite the fact that they don't work well in a lot of cases, despite the fact that, you know, and I hate this word, that there's still all these hallucinations that come out of them, this false information that is being pushed onto people. And we're just supposed to ignore all of that because it's in these companies' business interests. And related to what we were talking about last week, you know, it feels like they can't fail because they have been wrapped up in this geopolitical moment, that AI has become this tool of these countries kind of fighting one another and trying to achieve dominance, that there's all this money for AI regardless of what is actually coming out of that. And so companies like Microsoft and Google can just continue pushing all of this on us relentlessly.
I mean, if you look at, you know, the tech news sites will, you know, go to these events and then sort of break down all of the main sort of announcements and new products and new prototypes that are coming out of the companies. And the reason that we're talking about it today is, as foreshadowed in our opening segment, you know, these companies, they don't, you know, especially Microsoft, Meta, and Google, they dominate so much of the web infrastructure, the platforms, everything that we use. So what they decide to pursue product-wise, what they decide to release, the kind of updates that they would kind of do, that completely shapes our online experience, which again is so bad that teenagers want to unplug the whole thing. And it's just reading through this stuff, The Verge's 15 biggest announcements at Google I.O., it's 90% AI. It's just Google Meet adds AI translation to speech. That's actually one of the better ones. Google's experimental AI assistant called Astra, which I think we'll talk about a little bit, which is just like an agentic sort of chatbot that you leave running on your phone all the time. So it's like observing data and observing, you know, through your camera lens, things that it might be able to. We can go out on a limb here and say that it doesn't work yet, but they have one of these like demos where somebody's trying to fix their bike and they're just saying, you know, like, oh, go scroll through the email that I had with the bike shop and see what kind of screws I needed, or find a YouTube video that can walk me through this step. All things that we might add are like adding like 1 to 2 seconds of convenience as opposed to like a previous Google search, or, you know, just like asking your dad who might know how to fix a bike, or your neighbor.
You can't ask a person. You need to ask a digital tool. Yeah. But it's fascinating, right? Because you talk about like 1 to 2 seconds of extra convenience, and like the trade-off to that is there's already so much concern about like the amount of data these companies are collecting, the amount of like surveillance that is built into the digital infrastructure, and they're like, hey, how about a little bit of extra convenience? But now our microphones are like actively on all the time. We're recording all the time. We're tracking everything that you're possibly doing and being much more explicit about it. But hey, like there's a little bit of AI convenience in there for you. But
instead of typing in how to fix my bike, you can just ask the Agentic AI. It'll probably get it wrong the first time you ask, and you'll have to ask again. But at least you won't have to like use your thumb muscles at all. I think, yeah, disheartening is the word, but not surprising, right? Like
Yep.
AI has so firmly overtaken every other tech trend. It is everything right now. Like it has collapsed Silicon Valley's imagination, as we talk about here, to the extent that it had one 5 years ago. Everything is AI, and so you're scanning this, and same thing with Microsoft Build, which is even more boring. It's all about
Of
getting
course, it's
more.
Microsoft, right?
It's Microsoft, right? It's more about like optimizing GitHub, which again, I feel like is an undersung story amid the AI takeover. Like GitHub was like legitimately beloved among coders because people would share their code databases and open source tools there. And Microsoft bought it and now has just fully optimized it into sort of a tool for automating coding. So we talk a lot about how AI is like automating the art production and ruining sort of the market for artists and putting artists and illustrators and creative workers out of work. But this one, you can kind of see with the writing on the wall for this one too. And it's in more corporate environments and with management who might be even more eager to try to. But yeah, so they've turned GitHub again into this tool that was shared and compiled by coders over the many years. And now they're taking it one step further. One of the things Microsoft wants to do is to now you can like you can use like Copilot, Microsoft's sort of AI tool, to harness GitHub to suggest a code snippet. But what they want to do now is they want to make, they call it code completion to autonomous developer experience. So they want things that can code autonomously. So, this is getting it into the whole vibe coding thing that we haven't talked about a whole lot here, but this idea that you don't even need the skills to code. You can just rely on AI and code by vibe.
Which I don't fully buy, Like I was
Yeah.
talking to some folks just the other day and they were kind of like, when you have this AI writing the code, you don't actually know how the code was written and like what is really going on with it. And it's not guaranteed that the AI is actually doing a good job with the coding. If you're then building things on top of it, like you don't have any documentation of the code itself. So you don't know a lot of what's behind it. And so if you run into problems later, then it's like you can't easily go back and try to fix it. Like I think that there's a lot of potential vulnerabilities that are really being built into all this. And these companies don't really care because looks like efficiency and blah, blah, blah. And they'll probably realize the consequences of it later. And certainly companies that end up relying on it. But for now, it's like, ooh, this is the easy thing. You can lay off your workers. You don't need to pay your coders as much, blah, blah, blah. But again, like all these things, there are always consequences on the other side that they aren't considering.
So, I've been soliciting testimonials from workers who've had AI introduced into their workplaces and I'm hearing from coders a lot. And this is the line that I'm hearing, is that management is, in a lot of cases, not all, of course, but quite zealous about the use of AI. And so they're downsizing, laying off, and they're just like, this is so short-sighted because things are going to stop working. There are things that are going to be put in there that nobody knows how they got there in the code. One of the lines with AI is that it's like, okay, it'll make you more efficient. You just have it generated, but you still need a human. You want a human to check that code. But research shows that people are not good at checking their output for a number of reasons, right? Like you're creating it in the first place because you're pressed for time or you're too lazy to do it yourself, or you just, are interested in the efficiency aspect. And then how meticulous are you going to be, like spot checking that code that you produced to get out of doing work? Or even if you want to, even if you do have the best intentions to go through and check it, like you have blind spots because you just made it or you don't, again, it's just proving to not quite be the case that people can check the code reliably. So I think what you said is absolutely right. What I'm hearing from all of these folks is that we might just see systems start to decay in worrying ways in that digital infrastructure because, yeah, it's propped up with AI generated code that folks might not know, where the problem is or how to fix it. And especially as we're seeing turnover, as, management wants to hire fewer workers. Usually that's how it's working. It's often not layoffs, but attrition, right? Not hiring new people. Just seeing again, like this, I guess the lack of any real interest from these tech companies in doing anything beyond doubling down on the trends that are already there. That what else can we automate? Can we automate this? Do people want to automate this? How much can we automate? Do you want to learn how to fix your bike? No. Or do you want an agent to do everything except turn the screw for you? Like, do you actually want to possess any knowledge about how things work at all? Or can we automate the entire holding of that knowledge? Which is like a question we have to seriously ask right now. I mean, not like that. I think think they're seeing what they can turn into products, what people will actually be willing to pay for, because so far it's not much. And also it's the AI overview stuff that was in there too, which they've rammed into everything. They've declared this is Google's AI overview, which if you've done a Google search in the last 6 months, then you know what it is.
Unfortunately.
It's still wrong. It's still wrong a shocking amount of time.
Especially if you ask it like things that are not completely obvious. Like it's going to be wrong all the time. Just the other day, I was like going through my password keeper or whatever you call that, and like finding accounts that I hadn't used in a long time and then like reaching out to try to delete them. And so I went into Google a number of times and like asked if there was an account that I went into and there wasn't an obvious like delete account kind of button or whatnot, then I'd go into Google and be like, how do you delete the account for this kind of website? And so often the AI overview would pop up and be like, you just go to the settings tab and click the delete account button. And it's like, no, but there's no delete account button. Too. This is the point.
Which is so funny because it's pulling from like outdated, tutorials or tutorials that it's hallucinated or combined from different things.
Or, taken from a completely different website and just shoving it into this AI overview, right?
AI overview remains, I think, the funniest AI product because it's like Google is really killing its own reputation and credibility. I think maybe it just did get to the point where it was large enough where it's not particularly concerned about having a crappy product. Again, it's front-facing, most accessed, most like Google search. That was its entire cash cow. That's what we know Google for, to a lesser extent, Gmail and YouTube or whatever, Google Maps. But that's where all of its money came from. And now it's just polluting it. And the fear is not, for me anyways, that, that Google messes up and it gets a ding on its bottom line and, shareholders sort of get angry. My fear is that people sort of acquiesce to this and don't use alternatives. And they're like, well, the new reality is that the information that we could receive at any time is just wrong. And that's just sort of the new nature of our digital environment, is that things are just kind of wrong all the time. And that just bleeds into so many other social issues as well.
Well, this is it, right? Like, I think that there's a huge vulnerability that it has created for itself that creates a huge opportunity for other players to take advantage of. I've been experimenting with different search engines at the moment, from non-US companies. And unfortunately, they're often not that great. And it's like, man, if a company can really...
What are you using?
So I've been using Ecosia and Quant, I believe it's called, which are out of Germany and France. I tried one called Mojeek in the UK, because often these alternatives like Ecosia and Quant still take advantage of Bing or Google or whatnot for some of their results. But Mojeek is its own thing. And unfortunately, it is terrible. Ecosia and Quant are totally usable, but on more obscure things, you're not going to get a very good, set of results.
Are you not using Kagi and DuckDuckGo because they're U.S. companies?
Exactly,
and you're
doing American.
Yeah, because you're in your reject U.S. tech phase, which more power to you.
Yeah, this is my experimentation, right? And so there was a story, interestingly, this past week, that apparently the European Union I think it's looking at funding or has started funding the creation of a web index that could potentially be used for alternative search engines. So I thought that was a really interesting potential development. Maybe if people look into it, there's not going to be very much there to actually write home about. It's not going to be a very good project or something, but it's these are the types of things where I'm I think they should be trying this kind of stuff to see if there's opportunity there. But again, this takes us on a bit of a different direction than what we were talking about. It's a vulnerability and it's also an opportunity as a result, right? That's how I feel about it.
Public search, international, publicly regulated by a body ICANN,
decentralized, bring the libraries back in. Let's do this thing,
seriously.
Yeah.
A nonprofit, decentralized public search engine.
Exactly.
Who's building it? Who's building that?
Let's go. Can I pull out a few things from this list that I thought really stood out to me from these two conferences?
Yeah, the one that I was talking about real quickly was Project Astra, which is that universal AI system. That's what we touched on as being the always on thing.
And this is still to be clear, it's still an experiment, not a public product that's out yet, but an ambition for where they want to go, obviously. But yeah, so there are a few things here that really stood out. Obviously there's the translation translation thing, which I agree with you. There's potential uses there. Like it's probably the thing that they showed off that is, I would argue, maybe the most useful, or I still think there are potential issues there. Like what if you're on a meeting and the translation really messes up? Like I think we'll have to see how this works in practice and if it actually works on many languages outside of like the big European languages or whatnot.
But you can still see how it's like a good idea. Like,
Absolutely.
that's something people want. That's what sets it apart from all these other things. It's like people might say, oh, it would be cool if I could talk to this person who I just met in Italy and, just have an act, that would be cool.
And I think that's also why you see like kind of Meta and the smart glass companies, one of the first big features they always roll out is like, look, you can do translation and like translate things with your glasses or whatnot. Because like you can see the appeal of it, especially for, I would argue, like the type of class that they're targeting, business oriented jet setters, people who are of a higher income level where they would be running into more people who potentially don't speak the language and whatnot.
It's the megatechnic bribe, as Lewis Mumford would say. The thing that's like, oh, like, well, it could do this thing's so cool. We'll get you, let us do all this other stuff too. It's like we could justify it with this, this use case.
Yeah, I love
the thing
that
makes
that
AI
example. Yeah, that's great. But I also wonder, like, if it gets people to like change the way that they speak to try to make sure that the AI tool works. Like, the way that people can speak differently when they speak to like voice assistants because they learn that like it's only actually going to work if they speak a certain way toward it. Like, I wonder if it encourages people to change up speech patterns if it becomes like an actually commonly used type of thing. But anyway, that's like a thought.
Yeah, we got to see if the thing works at all.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, no, these are all interesting things, like a homogenizer. It kind of like, people have like their professional voices that they try to talk. Yeah.
Just a couple other things from this list that I thought were interesting. One of the things Microsoft talked about was using AI to help with better weather prediction. And it's not the first company to talk about this. We've seen some others doing the same thing. But to me, every time I see a company talking about using generative AI, which obviously has all these issues with making stuff up for weather prediction and weather forecasting, I also think about the fact that the Trump administration is in the process of like gutting the National Weather Service in the United States. Yeah. We just saw this story about, because of these cuts, these tornado warnings were not given out and a bunch of people died because they didn't know that this tornado was coming. And it seems like in part that's because of cuts that were made. And so it's like, on the one hand, you're doing these massive cuts to the weather service. And on the other hand, you're saying, okay, we can just use AI to show the weather a bit more. And it's like, this makes no sense. Like, this shows how AI, again, justifies these cuts, justifies this austerity.
But it can't work without data, and it can't work without that's the whole pitch of AI, is that like it will augment all that. Well, that's obviously not how it's being used in practice by those in power and those seeking to profit from it. It's quite clear how it's being used now. That these things are happening, I think that's such a great sort of encapsulation of where we are at right now. I like it, just Doge writ large, everything, the AI first strategy there justified to gut, our federal agencies and to fire federal workers. And instead of, institutional knowledge, instead of good data, you get a shitty AI simulacrum that's going to give us faulty information a lot of the time.
And speaking of Doge, I think that is a really, good thing to point out, because of course, Elon Musk was part of this story as well. Earlier this week, or was it late last week, people will remember that there was this story about Grok going off the rails and responding to almost every prompt with talk about white genocide in South Africa, because Elon Musk has been really obsessed with this of late. And it seems like someone went in there and made some little tweaks to what Grok was doing.
Someone went in there at 3 a.m. in the morning. Do you know anybody who might be like running, who's up that late all the time, making bad decisions, even in the context of his vast panoply of bad decisions? I think that story broke right after we recorded last week, because
but it's like, some random rogue actor at 3 a.m.
And the funny thing is that Grok did XAI, the official XAI account. So if you did miss the story, like you said, it was just random prompts. People would just be on X or on Twitter and say like, Grok, what is this, to like a concert video or something. And then Grok would start talking about like white genocide and kill the Boers. And like, and people were like, what? what? And it just kept happening, and it became sort of like a big story in the tech world. The next day, like XAI took the fairly extraordinary step, publicly posting on Twitter, it's like, there was an actor who was unauthorized who at 3 a.m. this morning posted an update to the system and added this language and messed with I don't have the actual announcement in front of me, but basically all but just like throwing Elon Musk under the bus, like directly, just saying like, we didn't do this. Like, this was someone who had the power to come in at 3 a.m. in the middle of his ketamine bender or whatever and do this. We're not going to name names, but somebody did this. We'll let you figure it out.
Even the XAI employees are getting fed up with his antics. I do want to connect this to the Microsoft stuff, but before I do that, did you see the post that Grok made in response to someone made this prompt asking for Grok to explain what was going on in the voice of Jar Jar Binks?
I did not see that.
So Grok, the response, from this chatbot, I apologize for reading chatbot responses to people. I generally don't do this, but I thought this was hilarious. So Grok's response is, Misa gonna explain this white genocide thing like Jar Jar Binks, okie day. Some folks think there's a big sneaky plan to make white people go poof, gone, finito. They say stuff like too many non-white folks moving in, mixing cultures, and fewer white babies being born is all part of this plan. But Misa think that's a bit loony. Experts say these changes just happen.
You're gonna keep going with it. Okay, keep going. Finish it out. Come on, we're on. I appreciate the dedication to the bit. Please bring us home.
Because of how people live, move, and choose families. No proof of any mean plan. Nope. This idea comes from scary, angry talk, not truth. So no worry. Just keep being kind to all. Okie day.
Wow. I'm going to pause here so that every listener can just applaud in their place of listening for Paris Marx's rendition of Grok as Jar Jar Binks.
Thank you, Brian.
I thought you were going to give us like a sentence, but you went all in. You did the whole thing.
I know. Maybe we should cut it back.
I think let's let it ride. You did it. You went all in. I think anything else would be a disservice to your performance there.
Yeah, I agree.
But so let me ask you. let me ask you. Does the fact that Grok defends white genocide in the voice of Jar Jar Binks, would that, say, prevent a tech giant from wanting to add this service to their offerings? To their
Absolutely not.
cloud
This
services?
is a selling feature, isn't it? Everyone is now going to sign up to Microsoft Azure because Grok has been added as a chatbot option or as an AI model option. This is what the business community is asking for. Didn't you know this?
This is peak enterprise AI. This is a revolution in efficiency and innovation.
Brian is currently wiping the tears out of his eyes for listeners who can't see us.
It was a thing of beauty. What can I say? I was moved.
Thank you.
Moved to tears. But I am, of course, referencing the fact that Microsoft is now partnering with XAI to bring Grok onto its cloud services, onto Azure. It's for those of you unfamiliar, like the vast majority of the internet is now run on 3 cloud services, basically: AWS, Amazon Web Services, Google, and Microsoft's Azure there. And so now we got Grok in with Microsoft.
The reason they're doing this is not because they love Grok and Grok is so amazing, but this is Microsoft's play to basically be like, you should move your business to Azure. You should be on the Azure cloud because any option that you want is going to be available here in terms of AI. They want to make sure all the different AI platforms are available for customers of their enterprise services because, of course, they will make money by reselling it to those customers, but also because they imagine, I guess, that the pitch is that it's all here. You should be on Azure because all your options are in one place. It's better than Amazon. It's better than Google because we're giving you whatever you want, basically. So even though Grok,
including but not limited to defenses of white genocide. In the voice
Exactly.
of Jar Jar
You know,
Binks.
it did not matter that this happened days before. Satya Nadella still happily went up on stage and was like, hey, everyone, we're going to get Grok.
A quick shout to like the truly insane profile of Satya Nadella in Bloomberg last week, which we'll drop this in the show notes. Yeah, obviously Microsoft is historically the boring company that so they have to I find new angles to sort of make them stand out. And like Satya Nadella is just like, I've handed my entire life over to AI, to the AI services that we are powering, that Microsoft is making possible through all of our Copilot and different services. And it's like, I don't listen to podcasts. I make a chatbot out of podcasts and then talk to the podcast because that's something that anyone wants to do or any sane person does. Anyways, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft.
It shows you how these people, it's always said that these are like the smartest people in the world. That's why they deserve to have all this money and power. And read this profile in Bloomberg, and in particular this part about where he's talking about how he has just integrated these chatbots into so many parts of his life and what he does. And it's like, these people are fucking stupid. They need to be deposed as quickly as possible if we are going to save this world that we all collectively live in, because these fucking idiots are not going to do it.
It's either stupid or just so craven that
I guess,
because he thinks that this is a way to sort of present the utility of all of these features, and he needs to be a living demonstration of how useful they all are, or tell Bloomberg that he just does all of this stuff all the time. So yeah, it's either that his life is a dumb nightmare, or he is just actively living a series of advertisements for services that just make us all dumber.
He literally talks about how he's using 10 custom agents from Copilot Studio that he calls his AI chiefs of staff that do a bunch
so
of
embarrassing.
I know. Please stop. Please stop.
Why would we want our tech company CEO who's in charge of so much of our digital life to outsource his thinking to mean statistical models of decisions that have been made before? Why would we want to do that? I don't know. I will just say before we get to our final stories that we've given them a lot of shit. To me, these announcements, they kind of have an air of desperation to me. I mean, I worry that I'm always seeing this in the leaves but I do think it's just AI in this, AI in video, agentic AI in your smartphone camera, AI in the coding base, AI where can it work? Where can we get this thing to work? Where can we put it over here?
When are they adding AI to your pencil and AI to your toilet and
which is what we saw in the smart tech boom, right?
Yeah.
Where it's smart. It's the same kind of mentality. And what happened to the smart tech boom? It eventually just kind of collapsed under the weight of its own sort of absurdity. And I'm getting those vibes here. This AI boom is unlike anything that I've seen before as a tech writer. Just the immensity and the all-innedness of the mentality and sort of the VC capital is just so extreme that it's very different in that way, or not very different, but just maybe an order of magnitude different than say that smart tech or Uber for X or whatever. So I don't know, all bets are off, but this seems so desperate. I'm looking at all this stuff and going even if I'm into AI, am I excited about all of this? It's variations of shit that we've been hearing about for years. A lot of it clearly isn't going to work anytime soon. A lot of it just doesn't seem that interesting or useful. It's everything. It's all over the place. Does it need to be everywhere? Are we getting a little tired of this? Is it running thin? I don't know. It feels frothier than it's ever been, and it feels like what it would, this is what it would look like just before a bubble bursts.
Yeah. Well, I remember when Google did its I/O last year, I was I'm exhausted by all this stuff. It seems so pointless. And this year, it still seems so pointless. They're just finding an excuse to keep rolling out AI in more places. But the difference this time to me feels like AI has been rolled into this whole geopolitical game. You see the contrast between what is actually being announced here and what they're trying to get people excited about, with, on the other hand, the way that AI is being framed as key to who wins out on the geopolitical power battle, and all this money is going to be funneled into it regardless of what's happening, because apparently it's so important. Where you see the reason this hasn't all collapsed is just because all these countries are pretending that AI is like key to their political positioning in the next few years. And that is what feels like it's kind of keeping this bubble going at the moment.
I mean, that's clearly where they're looking to turn, because they're just not seeing the big AI companies, especially like Anthropic and OpenAI, that don't have their established monopolies like Google and Microsoft to fall back on. But I think that's increasingly where they're turning, because they're just not seeing the revenues that they're hoping to see in their other lines of business, and it's so expensive and so resource intensive. So yeah, I think that sort of increasingly sort of grafting themselves onto the state or finding new ways. But there's a persuasive case to be made that won't even be enough given like the enormity of the investments. But we'll see. But regardless, I do think it's just sort of like it continues to be this like real poverty of vision of what technology can be. It's just asking the question of like, what can we outsource to these statistical models? What kind of thinking can we get them to do for us so we don't have to do it? What kind of like, digital work can be replaced by these things? And there's such sort of dull questions to ask, and it is deflating and disheartening, as you said, that this kind of feels like it's the extent of what the AI boom can offer us.
Very well said. Will we get to our final stories then?
Let's do it. Let's rattle them off.
First up, SpaceX is trying to take over a chunk of South Florida and call it a new municipality, Starbase, that will be run by a SpaceX employee as mayor. As they are trying to take over that piece of land, SpaceX is also pushing for laws in the Texas legislature that would allow municipalities that have starports to close public beach access, clearly directed at the Boca Chica beach that is right next to SpaceX's launch pads. It's a real worrying development happening down there.
Yes, indeed. I hate to see it. In other news, the August Chicago newspaper, the Sun-Times, has caught endless reams of flack from the internet after it has been uncovered that it published an AI-generated book list in an insert in its print edition. It was clearly AI-generated, as by the books it recommends for summer reading are by real authors, but the books, I think like 13 out of 15 of them, do not exist. 404 Media talked to the creator of this list, who is, quote, very embarrassed, and it should never have happened. And the one thing I want to say and add to this story is most of the ire has been directed at this gentleman who produced the list. Obviously, you don't want your journalists using AI generated tools. Bad look. And the Chicago Sun-Times for publishing this, apparently without even being aware that they published it. It was in an insert, so it wasn't part of the regular paper, but still, it's coming with the Chicago Sun-Times. But I do want to say that like this is what we expect to see as big tech and AI have eroded the market for writing, has eroded the ability for a writer to earn a living, and hearing this nonstop chatter from the AI crowd that you have to use AI or fall behind. So inevitably, this guy, I kind of feel bad for him almost, because I don't know his full story, but he's like a longtime freelancer, probably not making a lot of money, probably has seen his rates decline just like everybody else in journalism, and is feeling like he's got to keep up, use the tool, used AI to generate this stuff. Again, never do it. You can never do it, journalists. Do not use AI under any circumstances. That's my rule of thumb. Never, ever. Don't write anything with AI. But I think blaming this guy for the conditions that Silicon Valley and big tech created isn't the way to go. So let's direct our ire at the AI consumer tech that's polluting the ecosystem and driving down wages, and big tech for profiting off of it.
And maybe let's not leave the Chicago Sun-Times out of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, come on, editor. Yeah. Check your pieces. Again, yeah, this is not to absolve anybody involved of blame. Under no circumstance. We got to fight back and not use them. But again, we just also need to understand that the conditions have been ripened by big tech. But yeah, no, come on.
Next up, the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, often associated with Senator Elizabeth Warren, which has been doing some really good things, fighting for consumers against all these big companies that are trying to take advantage of them. Well, obviously, it has new leadership under Trump, and the latest update is that it has canceled plans for a rule that would limit data brokers' ability to sell sensitive personal data on Americans. Because, why would you want to limit that? Especially when the big narrative that we hear around banning TikTok is always some other foreign country might get access to people's data America. And of course, they can just buy that from a data broker if they want it. They don't need to get it from TikTok, but we're still going to let data brokers do whatever they want, which is wild.
Boo. And in that same general sphere, just a quick update on the topic that we discussed in depth last week, and that is the push to ban state-level lawmaking around AI in the budget reconciliation process. It has been met with some critical resistance. I think 100 groups have all signed letters and written in opposing this measure. A bipartisan coalition in California has spoken out against what would be an overreach into the state's ability to pass laws governing its own constituents. But alas, the language is, as we record, still in the bill, which has passed the House of Representatives and is in the process of being reconciled with the Senate. So time will tell whether or not it stands, but this is a potentially brutal and dangerous amendment to the bill.
Yeah, very important update there. And final story of this week, you might remember, our pals Elmo, Oscar the Grouch, Cookie Monster from Sesame Street, associated with, the public broadcaster or nonprofit broadcaster PBS in the United States. Well, they previously had a deal with HBO to get more funding. That ended recently because of everything going on over at Warner Discovery. And the news we got recently is that Netflix will be taking over Sesame Street from here on out, basically making sure that it has the money to continue making its program. But that means that Sesame Street will be going to Netflix now, will be published on Netflix. For American watchers, it will still be published on PBS. So, kids who don't have Netflix can still watch it, can still get access to this program. But it will be interesting to see how Netflix influence might change the way that Sesame Street, is made, operates into the future. It will also be making some Sesame Street video games, apparently, as a result of this that will be on its platform. But, good thing that Sesame Street is getting funding, that it can continue working. Disappointing, but sign of the times that, of course, it's because of some big streaming company that continues. Well, Brian, I think that's it for this week. What do you think?
I think the system has crashed on us once again. You prefaced this recording session with the notion that this might be a short one.
I know.
But we can't help but deliver to you, the listener, because you deserve it. Thank you, as always, for joining us and sifting through the wreckage.
System Crash is hosted by Paris Marks and Brian Merchant. Production is by Eric Wickham. Our theme music is Dystopia by our good friends in Yacht. Support the show on patreon.com/systemcrashpod to get a monthly bonus episode. Thanks for listening.
Bye.